25% of soldiers who arrive at Army Sniper School can't hit a target the size of your hand from 25 meters away. They've been declared expert marksmen by their units. They've passed every qualification, and they can't execute the most basic shot required to continue training. Most of them are gone within 48 hours. The path from ordinary infantry soldier to elite military sniper isn't a ladder you climb through time and service. It's a filter system that removes nearly everyone who enters it. At each level, the standards tighten, the missions grow darker, the psychological weight compounds. By the time you reach the highest echelons, you're operating in a world most military personnel don't know exists. This is how you become a ghost. Level 1 begins before you ever submit an application. You need an ASVAB score of at least 100 on the general technical portion. That alone eliminates most candidates. You need a spotless record, military and civilian. No drug use, no alcohol incidents, nothing that suggests instability. You need an interim secret security clearance, which means background investigators will interview your high school teachers and childhood neighbours. You need to be physically capable of carrying 110 pounds of equipment through hostile terrain for days without resupply. But here's what nobody tells you until later. The physical and administrative requirements aren't the actual filter. They're just the minimum price of entry to discover whether you have something that can't be taught or tested. Some people's minds sharpen under extreme pressure. Most people's minds fragment. You won't know which category you belong to until you're already deep into training. The Army runs more than 300 soldiers through sniper school each year at Fort Benning, Georgia. The Marines put candidates through a 79-day Scout Sniper basic course after a 3-week indoctrination that cuts half the applicants before real training begins. The Marine graduation rate hovers around 44%. Army numbers aren't much better. These aren't courses designed to educate. They're designed to identify the tiny percentage of soldiers who possess a specific psychological architecture. Day 2 at Fort Benning, you're building a ghillie suit. Strips of burlap attached to netting, layered with local vegetation until you resemble something that isn't quite human. You'll spend hours positioning twigs and leaves in patterns that break up your silhouette. Then you'll cover your face and hands with camouflage paint, checking mirrors to ensure no skin shows through. This isn't costuming. This is learning to surrender your human shape to become part of the landscape. The stalking exercises separate the competent from the capable faster than anything else in training. Instructors position themselves with binoculars and scan fields where you're attempting to move. If they spot you, you fail that iteration and start over. The standards are absolute. Proper vegetation selection matters because sunlight reflecting off your rifle barrel will reveal your position instantly. Movement must be measured in inches per hour when necessary. You'll spend 6 hours crawling 200 meters while insects explore your face, and you remain completely motionless because movement means failure. Most people quit during stalking, not because it's physically impossible, but because their minds can't tolerate the combination of discomfort, tedium, and the knowledge that hours of effort can be erased by a single visible shift. The soldiers who persist aren't necessarily tougher. They're wired differently. Their nervous systems don't interpret stillness as suffering the same way. Marksmanship comes later, and it's harder than candidates expect. You grew up hunting, putting rounds on target at civilian ranges. You qualified expert with your service rifle. None of that prepares you for precision shooting at distances beyond 1,000 meters, where wind doesn't just push the bullet but curves it through air pockets with different temperatures and densities. Where gravity creates a parabolic arc that requires calculation, not intuition. Where the fundamentals you thought you'd mastered turn out to be foundations you're still constructing. The instructors watch for something specific during the final field exercise. 4 days operating on minimal supplies, completing stalks under evaluation, taking shots under pressure, functioning on sleep measured in minutes rather than hours. Your body stops distinguishing between mud and skin. Your mind compresses to the immediate task. Some candidates perform perfectly until something internal snaps. Some psychological governor fails under accumulated stress. They're removed immediately, not as punishment, but as recognition that this profession requires a particular mental architecture that can't be taught. You discover something useful about yourself. Your mind clarifies under pressure rather than fragmenting. Chaos simplifies instead of compounds. The harder conditions become, the more focused your thinking grows. It's not courage exactly. It's just how you're constructed. You graduate in the middle of your class. Competent, not spectacular. You receive your designation and orders to a team that needs bodies more than excellence. But graduation from sniper school isn't the achievement. It's permission to discover what you're actually capable of becoming. The real filter system is just beginning. Level 2, the spotter. Your team leader is Staff Sergeant Reyes, 4 deployments deep with eyes that track movement patterns you haven't learned to see yet. He's killed more people than attend most weddings, and he carries that arithmetic in ways that only surface after months of proximity. The slight repositioning before entering buildings. The seating choices at the dining facility that always provides sightlines to exits. The nightmares that leak through barracks walls at 0300. You're junior, which means you spot. The shooter takes the shot, but the spotter performs everything surrounding that moment. Range estimation through reticles and mathematics. Wind calls based on mirage and vegetation movement. Target identification against rules of engagement that shift with political winds back in Washington. Documentation of every round fired and every person it impacts. Your first deployment is a country you're contractually forbidden from naming. The enemy wears civilian clothes until the instant they don't. You learn to read threat signatures, the way hands position themselves near concealed weapons, the scanning patterns that indicate reconnaissance, the behavioral deviations from normalcy that precede violence by seconds. Your first kill happens at 800 meters. Reyes takes the shot while you call corrections and confirm the target meets engagement criteria. Through your scope, you watch a man positioning an RPG toward a convoy route. Then you watch physics arrive before sound does. The biological systems that sustained him simply stop. The weapon clatters to concrete, unfired. You expected to feel something more substantial. Horror, perhaps. Moral weight. What actually arrives is professional satisfaction. The technical execution was clean. The target was valid under current ROE. The outcome prevented casualties among friendlies. You file the man's face in whatever psychological compartment handles such things and transition to the next task. Reyes monitors you afterwards, searching for fractures. He's watched new spotters break at this threshold where abstract training becomes concrete reality. He doesn't find what concerns him, which might be reassuring or might be its own warning sign. Months teach you things Fort Benning couldn't. How morning air moves differently than afternoon air in specific terrain types. How to construct improvised hides when the textbook position doesn't exist. How to disengage when the shot isn't available, swallowing frustration because patience outweighs body count in every operational metric that matters. The deployment rhythm becomes familiar. Intensity of operations followed by the strange vacuum of downtime in secure zones, where nothing happens except waiting. Friendships form through experiences that can't be translated to people who weren't present. Letters from home arrive already obsolete, describing a world continuing without you in it. You learn Reyes completely, his breathing pattern before deciding to shoot versus the longer breath when he decides to hold, when he wants input and when he wants silence, the subtle indicators of stress accumulation that mean he needs space. You become an extension of his decision-making process, which is what effective spotter duty requires. Level 3, the shooter. Reyes rotates stateside after his 5th deployment, accepting a training command position that everyone understands is actually about the drinking that's become visible and the marriage that's already finished. You attend his departure with emotions that military transitions require. Gratitude for what he taught. Relief that he's leaving before something breaks completely. Grief for the version of him that might have existed before all those confirmed kills accumulated behind his eyes. His replacement is younger than you despite holding higher rank. A staff sergeant from a different unit, technically senior, but practically dependent on your accumulated experience. The power dynamic inverts without anyone acknowledging it directly. You become primary shooter because the team's operational requirements supersede the organizational chart. Your first shot as shooter is unremarkable by design. Confirmed hostile at 600 meters, wind steady, conditions optimal. The mechanics function exactly as trained. Breath control, natural pause, smooth trigger press, observe impact, confirm result, transition. But there's a compound in a valley where 3 American aid workers are held. Intelligence is solid, confirmed through multiple sources, time-stamped within hours. The cell holding them already uploaded 1 execution video. The operational window is narrow. The approach is complicated. The stakes are absolute. You establish position 1,400 meters out, farther than you've ever engaged in combat. The wind is variable, shifting direction as valley thermals create chaos. Your spotter calls numbers that keep changing. That might be correct or might be educated guesses at physics that refuses to cooperate. Hours pass watching through glass. Guard rotations on patterns you memorize. Hostages appearing briefly in a window. Faces from briefing photos. Alive currently, probably not for long. The shot opportunity arrives at sunset. Your target stops at a predictable position for exactly long enough. You apply corrections that feel partly mathematical and partly instinctual. The ballistics and the art combining in ways you couldn't explain under interrogation. The trigger breaks clean. The round flies for what feels like forever. The guard drops. The assault begins. 20 minutes later, helicopters extract the hostages. You're breaking down position as the sun disappears completely. 3 people are alive because of calculations you made in your head and executed with your hands. This weight distributes differently than the others. Not heavier exactly, just different in shape. Level 4. The instructor. You return to Fort Benning standing where evaluators stood when you were struggling through stalks. The institution persists beyond individuals. Teaching forces you to understand things you thought you already knew. Why certain techniques function the way they do, the reasons beneath procedures, the principles underlying rules. You become better at the craft by learning to create craftsmen. Candidates struggle with identical fundamentals you struggled with: trigger control, breath management, the discipline required to wait hours then execute perfectly in seconds. You watch them fracture against difficulty and learn to predict which ones persist. Not the physically strongest, not the naturally gifted, the ones who treat failure as data rather than verdict, who adjust and continue rather than repeating identical errors while expecting different outcomes. Your reputation develops around precise criticism and equitable treatment. Candidates learn your assessments target specific deficiencies rather than delivering general discouragement. That your standards don't negotiate. That graduates from your cycles perform measurably better in initial deployments, which is the only metric with actual value. But teaching creates distance from the work itself. You're producing shooters rather than being one. The skills you maintain on ranges feel different from skills tested in operations. The edge dulls slightly, not in technique, but in something harder to measure. The readiness for violence that combat requires becomes theoretical rather than practical. You miss it, which is the uncomfortable truth. The clarity of deployment, the stripped focus that combat creates. Training saves lives. Training is valuable. Training is also repetitive and administrative and drowning in paperwork that combat somehow never requires. When the opportunity arrives for one more deployment, you accept immediately. Level 5, the team leader. The unit has changed, younger faces with different references, cultural touchstones you don't share, technology that didn't exist when you started. They call you old man affectionately, which you're not yet but feel increasingly. Your knees predict weather. Your back remembers every uncomfortable position. Recovery time after hard operations stretches from days to weeks. But experience compounds in ways that matter. You've witnessed what succeeds and what fails. You've watched talented shooters make poor decisions under pressure and average shooters make excellent decisions through discipline. You know which tendencies to trust and which to override. Your team deploys to a conflict that's technically not war, operations that technically don't happen, results that technically won't be acknowledged. Targets are higher value. Intelligence is better. Shots are harder, but support is more substantial. You take a shot at 1,700 meters that builds your reputation. Difficult angle, variable wind, time pressure preventing usual preparation. The target moved between vehicles in a pattern, creating a window measured in seconds. You made the shot because the alternative was losing the target. You made it well because the alternative was unacceptable. The team discusses that shot afterward. It becomes legend, slightly inflated with each retelling. You don't correct exaggerations because morale has value. But privately, you know how much fortune contributed. Wind cooperated at the critical moment. Target paused slightly longer than expected. Physics worked in your favor when it could have worked against you. The shot that matters more is one nobody discusses. A mistake. Target identified and engaged who turned out wrong. Intelligence was bad. Your shot was perfect. Outcome was a dead civilian in a place he shouldn't have been doing things that appeared threatening but weren't. Collateral damage in sanitized language, murder in honest language. You don't sleep well for months. The faces accumulate anyway, hostile and civilian alike. But that face is different. That face asks questions your justifications don't answer. Rules of engagement cleared you. Review board cleared you. The face doesn't clear you. The face keeps visiting. You learn to carry that weight because the alternative is carrying no weight, which means becoming something worse. Soldiers who feel nothing concern you more than soldiers who feel everything. At least pain proves conscience remains intact. Level 6, the ghost. 22 years, hundreds of operations confirm kills you stopped counting because counting felt wrong. You've shaped a generation of shooters now shaping the next generation. Techniques you developed are being taught to soldiers who don't know your name. The scope goes in a case that goes in a closet you don't open often. Skills remain, slowly dulling through disuse. Some nights you dream of shots you didn't take. You'll never know if those lives did good or harm. That's the nature of this work. One shot at a time. One breath at a time. The discipline holds until it doesn't. The transition from recruit to ghost isn't about becoming more lethal. It's about becoming more invisible. To yourself, eventually. You carry capabilities most people can't imagine and experiences you can't share. The person you were before entering that first sniper course doesn't exist anymore. The person you became through all those levels exists in a space between what your country needed and what your conscience can carry. Somewhere right now, a soldier is filling out an application for sniper school. They're imagining precision and purpose. They don't know yet about the faces that accumulate, about becoming something their family won't fully recognize, about the particular loneliness of carrying secrets that matter. They'll learn, or they'll wash out in the first week. Either way, the machine continues selecting for that rare psychology that can do terrible things and still function. The filter system never stops running.